The next speaker is the Honorable Dambuza.
Ngicela isihlalo ohloniphekileyo. Ngicela uqale nje ke ndizame ukusa umyalezo apha ku-Honorable Mazibuko ukuthi abanye bethu apha kulendlu lo mthetho izivubeko zawo sisaziva namhlanje ngoba zenzeka kubazali bethu nathi sisaziva ezo zivubeko. Asithethi ngomsebenzi owenziwe yi-researcher. This is not a research work. Sithetha thina ngelivo elehle ebantwini bakuthi. House Chairperson, the President of the Republic of South Africa remarked during the 2013 State of the Nation address that this year marks a centenary for the 1913 Land Act, which turned black people into wanderers, laborers, and pariahs in their own land since its promulgation and commencement. The Act became law on the 19th of June 1913, limiting African land ownership to 7%, which later increased to 13% through the 1936 Native Trust and Land Act of South Africa. House Chairperson, le nkqubo yokuthathwa komhlaba igqibele ngokuthi ucalucalulo lususe uninzi lwabantu abamnyama ngenkani kwimihlaba yabo okutshiwe abantsundu, abebala namandiya, kangangokuba izigidi zabantu zasuswa ngokupheleleyo kwimihlaba yookhokho bazo. Amaxesha amaninzi basuswa ngenkohlakalo yangabomi nangaphandle kwembuyekezo. I-Surplus People Project ithelekelela ukuthi phakathi konyaka we-1960 nowe-1983 zizigidi abantu abasuswa ngenkani eMzantsi Afrika ngemithetho eliqela efana ne-Group Areas Act kwiminyaka yowe-1950 nangenkqubo ezazenzelwe ukulawula ukuhamba kwabantu abamnyama ebizwa phecelezi influx control. House Chairperson, the Land Act, however, did not come about in a historic vacuum, and its roots may be traced back deep into South African colonial history. Indeed, it may be said that the elements of dispossession in the Act were merely an extension of South Africa's long history of dispossession throughout the colonial era, whether through conquest or the application of law. They were forced to leave behind any buildings they had erected, for which they were not compensated. The physical manifestation of 1913 Land Act also included scores of African families and their livestock roaming the countryside in search of accommodation. The consequence was a level of dispossession and lack of security of tenure never before experienced by African sharecroppers whose choices diminished with each passing day. The living conditions on farms were generally poor, and often the accommodation offered would be on conditions that the former tenant's spouse and children also be employed on the farm. The prevailing conditions of Africans living on white-owned farms after 1913 were recorded by renowned author W.M. Macmillan. Yiyo ke lento sibona urhulumente okhokhelwa nguKhongolose emaxhephethu ethabathela kuye uxanduva lokuphucula impilo nokulwa inxwaleko nenhlupheko kubasebenzi kunye nabahlali basezifama. The lack of security in tenure as a direct consequence of the Land Act resulted in former African tenants being unable to erect substantial dwellings capable of providing adequate shelter to protect them from severe weather conditions. Instead, as farm laborers, they were condemned to run down dwellings which had a marked impact on their health. Another hardship brought about the Act was that children of former tenants were deprived of any level of education due to the unwillingness of farmers to grant permission to erect schools on their land. The racialized approach to spatial planning was also embodied in various legislative measures regulating group areas. The concept group area was a technical term indicating that an area of land was reserved for either white, black, colored, or Indian persons. Essentially, this meant that in relation to a declared white group area, for example, only white persons could vest rights and occupy land within that area. Therefore, the declaration of a group area meant that not only was the racial background of the occupiers delineated, but the kind of rights that could be vested and the concomitant development that could occur in these areas. Despite the existence of the influx control measures and squatting regulations, urbanization increased in the mid-1980s. Increased riots and the declaration of various states of emergency finally led to the abolishment of influx control in 1986. Apart from the racial dimension to urbanization and settlement patterns, other factors also contributed to the increasing demand for housing, especially within urban areas. The population growth, rising cost of material and labor, and the shortage of available land within commuting distance of city centers underlined the necessity to develop other forms of tenure that were not based on single title individual ownership. Although fragmented ownership began in the 1970s in South Africa, it became increasingly important, especially following the abolition of the influx control in 1980s and the official demise of apartheid during the 1990s. There was a conscious policy not to build low-income houses in order to both discourage urbanization of Africans and to prevent any form of interracial mixing. The rapid growth of informal settlements around urban centers was highlighted in statistics from 1980. The statistics revealed that almost 5.2 million South Africans were already living in informal settlements, with forecast of an annual population growth rate of 2.5%. A report released by the South African Cities Network revealed that as much as a quarter of South Africa's households could be classified as informal in nature. House Chairperson, post-1994, the ANC government adopted progressive policies, which has already achieved the stated policies to transform apartheid settlement patterns by developing integrated human settlements. As a result of the predominant delivery patterns of new housing in greenfields projects, the value of the assets transferred to poor households through the housing program is being fully realized. Sesiyazi ukuthi abantu abangaphezulu kwe-3.3 million baqhamle kuyo yona le program yezindlu evele kwi-policies zikahulumende. Namhlanje sithetha ngokuba kusatyalaliswa i-basic services, kusatyalaliswa i-service stands ukuthi abantu bakwazi ukuthi babe ne-title deeds, bakwazi ukuthi bazakhele izindlu abafuna ukuzakhela kuzo kwindawo abafuna ukuzakhela kuyo. I-Housing Development Agency i-agent eyavuma i-ANC yathatha isigqibo ngo-2007 ePulukwane ukuthi mako-establish this agency as a special purpose vehicle ukwenzela ukuba umhlaba wokwakhela abantu izindlu le agency ikwazi ukuthi i-identify i-acquirishe umhlaba. Siyavuya namhlanje ukureporta ukuthi at least 7.25 hectares have been acquired by this agency. Uhulumende sivile ukuthi seqalisile ukusabalalisa iprogram kaFLISP ukuthi bonke abantu abangotitshala amanesi namapolisa njalo njalo abangakwazi ukufumana iRDP houses mabaqhamle. Lonto ithethe ukuthi bafumana umhlaba bakwazi ukufumana bakwazi ukuzakhela izindlu. So uhulumende kaAfrican National Congress uyazama kangangoko ukuthi le ndaba yomhlaba mayiaddresseke ngendlela efanelekileyo. House Chairperson, ukwengeza apha into eyenzekileyo iCabinet kaAfrican National Congress ikwazi ukuthi kule ndaba yomhlaba mayikhuphe i-grant ebizwa ngoba yi-Urban Settlements Development Grant. Le grant incedisa ekubeni makuthengwe umhlaba ngomasipala ne-provinces ukwenzela uba kwakhelwe abantu izindlu. Loo nto ke siyayincoma kakhulu singu-African National Congress. Mandiyivala ndifuna ukutsho ngomyalezo othi Mgcini-sihlalo asizuyivuma nangona siyixhasa indaba yokuthi makubekho i-development kodwa asizuyivuma into kokubana at the expense ye development sibone kusatyalaliswa i-malls ngobani ababenefitayo kwezi malls sibone kusatyalaliswa i-nature reserves ngobani ababenefitayo i-golf courses ngobani ababenefitayo sithi noma siyixhasa yona inantsika inkqubela phambili kodwa makubhalanse kungathi apho nje kwabha kuthiwe kuzofakwa i-golf course abantu badinge indaba inantsika umhlaba wakwakhela izindlu.
Honourable member, your time is expired.
Ndiyabulela kakhulu Mgcini-sihlalo. Enkosi.
Thank you, honourable member.